I'd like to call a regular scheduled council meeting of April 15th, 2025 to order. No public hearings scheduled. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda from administration?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, administration has no additions or deletions to the agenda.
Anything from council? Not seeing anything. I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda as circulated.
I'll make that motion, Your Worship.
Councillor Butcher, thank you. I'll call that question. All in favor? Thank you. We don't have a public input section tonight or any delegations, but we do have some presentations. So I believe we're going to start off with Mike Krim from our assessors, Tanmar Consulting. And you have some information for us, so we'll leave it in your hands, sir. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of the council. Always a pleasure to present in front of you guys and ladies and talk about assessment. I know it's exciting stuff, so we'll get right into it. I know that you have an electronic version of the document that I provided. First 14 pages I'm not even going to touch on because it's been discussed before. It's Assessment 101. You can look at that at your own leisure. And if you do have any questions about any of that stuff during the presentation, certainly we can get into that as well. But we'll start on slide 15, and it's already up on the screen there. So get right into it. So next slide, please. And if there's any problems with it, let me know. All right. So for this year's assessment, the important dates that we needed to make everybody aware of is that we've adjusted our valuation date for assessment purposes to July 1st, 2024. That's a legislated date. It changes every year for assessment purposes. So all properties using the market value standard are assessed as of July 21st, 2024. There's also a condition date. The physical characteristics of each property are recorded as of December 31st, 2024. Next slide. This is the review area for last year. So every year we look at a specific 20% of property so that every property gets at least a more in-depth look every 5 years. This is the area that we focused on over the last year. So it's all the rural areas. There is a little bit of residential single family on the north side of town. There's the Cedarwood condominiums on Highway 38, a little bit of commercial along Highway 38. And that's about it. So on the next slide, we ended up sending out only 67 requests for information to any of the residential properties in that area. We did get a 46% response rate, and the information that we request is typical of any information that a real estate professional would want to know when trying to value property, including number of bathrooms, fireplaces, how much basement finish there would be, any type of renovations or replacements of windows, doors, cabinets. And so we've been doing that for a number of years now in Redwater and other municipalities, and it's actually been very good in getting data up to date and making sure that our database is inclusive of anything that's been going on at our residential properties over the years. For the properties that don't respond, we do a quick drive-by assessment, and if we're seeing stuff on the outside, windows, doors, siding, then we're also knocking on the door and leaving a callback card if we have to. Next slide. So when going to that July 1st, 2024 evaluation, we did notice that there were market increases again to your single family properties. The average market change is 5.9%. This map shows how that shows up in the various residential areas of town, from 3.9% in the northeast corner where we've got some mobile homes on titled lots at the low end, to 6.8% average assessment increase in that new area, the Willows. Next slide. This slide shows over the last 10 years what the average single-family dwelling assessment has done. So for this year, it's up 225,200 from where it was last year, 212,600. We're back to roughly the same value as we were 8 years ago during the 2017 taxation year. Next slide. The bar on this graph, that's the longest bar, that shows 77.98%. If you look to the left, that's changes between 4 and 8%. So I picked that 6% middle, 2% on either side of that, so 4 to 8%, and that means that 78% of your single-family properties increased in that by that amount, 4 to 6%. Anything above that's likely going to have had some growth due to renovations that we added, things like that. The highest ones would be the newest construction. Anything that's lower than 15% is typically something that we reviewed over the last year for any multitude of reasons. If something is a property that's in a significant state of disrepair, then it's going to have gone down quite a bit, and that might show up on that lower end. Next slide. I always like to do a little bit of a comparison with some of the other municipalities in the area to show where Redwater sits. For Bon Accord, and we do the assessments on all these 4 municipalities. So for Bon Accord, this is average single-family market was a 2.8% increase, and their average assessment is $282,000. Bruderheim didn't see as much of an increase, 1.2% market change, and their average assessment is $249,500. Fort Saskatchewan, 5.4%. Their average assessment is $469,000 now. And in Lamont, we actually had a pretty good increase there, plus 6.9%. And their average assessment is $220,600 for a single-family property. Next slide. This is where it gets a little bit interesting, and I'll be explaining a little bit about what we did, and happy to answer any questions. So, commercial light industrial, on the improved commercial side of things, not much change, pretty static. You'll see an average assessment change of about 0.5%. Hotels did go up in value. We're still struggling to get information from hotel property owners, and we're going to keep on bugging them to get that information that they're required to send us. But we did put an assessment increase on that. We had one sale of a hotel in town, and that helped a little bit as well. Your light industrial assessment, though, is going down. We had some sales come through over the last couple years and did some research on those sales, talked to property owners, and as a result, there's some significant drop in value for both land and for properties that have improvements on them. A couple of examples, the Trialta property at auction sold for under $1 million. We're not at that value because we realize it's an auction property as well, but we were at a $2 million assessment for those 2 properties before. So now we're somewhere in between. We did talk to the property owner on that one. Directly west of Trialta, there was a foreclosed property. A few years ago, it was listed at $360,000, and that price kept coming down, kept coming down, kept coming down. Last listing was at $247,000. It sold for $235,000 out of foreclosure, or foreclosed on at $235,000. Our assessment is now going to be around $260,000, which is still a significant downgrade from where it was assessed before. That would be a 23% decrease in assessment. There's a vacant 1-acre lot that's been for sale on Highway 644 for a number of years, listed originally at $180,000 that we can look back at on anyways in 2015, reduced in price to $125,000 in 2023, $80,000 in 2024. Previous assessment was $114,000, now it's assessed at $84,000. That's a 27% decrease, and I just looked today and it's now listed at $70,000. So not much choice for us but to follow what the market's been showing us in that area. So just wanted to let you know about that significant change this year. Next slide. For assessment growth, we did have 9 dwellings added to the roll, so single family, duplex, triplex. Some of them were still under construction at year-end 2024, so that's reflected on the roll as a progressive or house under construction. They are all municipal tax-free in 2025. And then there was a little bit of growth from our inspections and from the RFIs, which is the request for information. That's taking into account any renovations that might have occurred. For non-residential, there was a little bit of positive growth for Dairy Queen. At year-end 2024, that was still under construction. Start of a rebuild of a fire-damaged building downtown. And then on the negative side of things, again, some of that industrial changes that we had to implement, we're going to show up on the negative side on the growth. The former Trialta, the Redwater Center, which is that commercial property on the highway, retail and main floor, multifamily upstairs. That's, got a court-ordered sale on that as well, so some changes there as well. Next slide. This is an overall growth versus inflation summary that shows On the furthest left column, the farmland, the property assessment classes, 2024 tax year, 2025 tax year, how much growth and how much inflation or deflation. And in the end, your total assessment base, taxable assessment base, went from $312,500,000 to $321,600,000, of which almost $3.3 million in growth, or 1%, just over 1%, and $5.8 million in inflation, just under 2%. Next slide. What's next? Your property tax bylaw, mailing of the assessment notices, and we will field inquiries. We'll do inspections as required. Sometimes the inquiry is more of an explanation to the property owner of how the assessment system works and those kinds of things. Other times, there might be some concerns about the assessment value that we need to have a look at. We will do those inspections. And if necessary, there will be an ARB or Assessment Review Board for any appeals that may get registered in town. We will also start our next assessment cycle, including sending out the request for information again and doing any inspections. And on the next slide, that area is the residential on the west side of town, which is approximately 290 odd properties. And then the final slide before any questions, just some additional information, website links, Guide to Property Assessment and Taxation in Alberta, our website where we do have links to assessment reports. The public can go on and do some comparisons. If they know of properties that are similar to theirs, they can type in an address, pull up an assessment summary to compare the assessment of their property to that other one. And then the Capital Region Assessment Services Commission as well. And that is it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anything through to Mr. Krim?
Tina's not happy.
Any suggestions or ideas or comments with respect to the downturn in the industrial area?
I'm not sure I would have anything to suggest on that. We can only, Mr. Mayor, just follow that market and just make sure that on the assessment side of things that we're reflecting what the market is showing us. It'd be nice if some of the stuff that's happening around the area, the economic development in Fort Saskatchewan, for example, or in Sturgeon County would, kind of translate here, but it just doesn't seem to have done that in the last few years anyways.
It's nice to see a positive change in the residential side of things.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a realtor recently, and the information was that it seems that the residential market has a very quick turnover rate. Were you seeing that when you were doing your comparisons for assessments and stuff, that there was quite a bit of quick turnover, let's call it?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. What we've seen in a number of municipalities is it doesn't take long for a property to sell, if that's what you're referring to, and oftentimes sales are coming in at higher than list price because there's a bit of a competition, a lot of buyers for that one property. Maybe not as much in Redwater, but it does definitely happen. But it's certainly occurred all around Edmonton. We're still seeing stuff. I live in Sherwood Park. We don't do the assessment there, but we see stuff all the time where it's on the marketplace, like there's a sign on it for a day and there's a sold sign on it the next day.
It doesn't seem to be long here either.
I'm sorry?
The properties in town here don't seem to be on the market that long either, unless they're elected, but
That was the information I was getting, was
Yeah.
that, anything after that 1980 build seemed to be less than a week and it was gone, sort of thing, so.
And that would translate back to the market value increase that's seen, because that demand is going to drive that price up, and that's why we're seeing that 5.8 or what have you on the assessment side of things, 5.9.
Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
I don't know if this can have any comment on this. We've had a couple derelict houses in town here. and you get assessed at market value far above, well, for example, an empty lot here is going for about 45,000, and this house gets assessed at, say, 79,000, but the poor guy's gotta tear it down. And so it'd be better off to go buy the 45,000 lot with nothing on it. Is there anything we've got to work with that? Like, we go to put it out to tax auction because they haven't paid their taxes, and we gotta list it at 79,000.
Through the mayor to the councillor, if we're aware of a derelict property, we will definitely spend the time to try and get that assessment to where it needs to be. If it needs to be just land value only because it's a knockdown, then we'll get it there. But if we're not aware of it, then sometimes we depend on somebody from administration or council to contact us, or the property owner. The onus is kind of on the property owner too when they get that assessment notice in the spring. If they think their property is worthless and we've got it assessed at 80,000 or 90,000,
We're not necessarily wanting that to go down because we want them to do something if the tax bill is high.
Yeah.
But it's when we go and we end up with it in our lap, we have to list it at full market value to try to sell it, and you can't sell it.
so, yeah.
There's some of those you wouldn't even get out of the car to go look at.
Yeah.
And it might be advantageous, at least with the upcoming assessment. There's at least one of those properties in that area that we can make sure Mike's aware of and take a look-see at it with a different lens. That might be advantageous to us.
Okay.
Maybe not, maybe. Anything else for Mr. Crimm? Mike, once again, thanks for giving us the information we need. I know administration's happy working with you and your crew. Every year's a surprise. We don't know what the numbers are going to be till you get here, but it's greatly appreciated that you spend the time with our community and treat it as it should be. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Tanner, great job, buddy.
Thank you. I forgot to introduce, this is my son, Tanner. He's been with us for a number of years and just finishing up his accreditation requirements for assessment, yeah.
So you can stop at Dairy Queen and get Dad to buy you an ice cream.
We look forward to the presentation next year. You will be doing it.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much.
Guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
7.2, the audited financial statement. We're doing that a little later on in the agenda, correct?
By the looks of it.
Oh,
He's up
okay.
there, he's waiting.
He's waiting.
The other Tanner wants to talk.
There was nothing attached to my agenda with
Neither.
respect to it. So everything you're going to tell us is a surprise. So welcome.
Oh, okay, well, I can try not to be too surprising, but it should be a pretty typical financial statement discussion, hopefully.
Miranda.
Sorry.
We're just going to get the volume turned up just a touch. And I mentioned there's a full report of the audited financial statement later on, but there wasn't anything attached to this part of the agenda, so I wasn't sure what was happening. So, super. We're in your hands. Thank you.
Do you want that one?
Okay, well, I guess glad to be here virtually. Sorry I couldn't make it in person today, but the plan, as usual, you've probably seen this a few times now, is to go through a couple documents. The first is the audited financial statements, and then the second would be our audit findings report. So I can't really see anybody right now, so if you're gonna have any questions, you're gonna have to kind of yell at me or something, so I know if you've got any questions, but I will pause and ask for questions along the way as well. Oh, look at that, now I can see some people.
It's magic.
Okay, great. I guess, is there something you're gonna be projecting onto the screen for everybody to follow along with, or does everybody have it, or should I share my screen? I can do that as well.
Yeah, we don't have it in the.
The attachments would be under
11.
business.
Yeah.
Go to the audited financial statement.
I think we all have it on our tablets and whatnot, so we'll follow
So,
through.
and I'll just kind of tell you what page I'm on and go from there. So, okay, with that, I will jump in right here to the first page of the financial statements, which is the independent auditor's report. So this is basically our financial, the piece that we put onto your financial statements that belongs to MNP. So the first paragraph there you can see is the opinion paragraph. That's the most important one. That's where we obviously give our opinion on your financials. The most important piece of that is the second paragraph, and basically just states that, in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position of the town as of December 31st, 2024. So kind of a long-winded way of saying a clean audit opinion, which is what you're used to seeing, and it hasn't changed this year. If there was a problem with the financials in any way that we would have to bring to your attention, you would have what's called a qualified opinion, and then there would be a whole separate paragraph explaining what that is. So obviously in this case, we don't have that issue, so a clean audit opinion, which is great. The basis for opinion paragraph just outlines the fact that we have to follow Canadian generally accepted auditing standards, same as any audit that we do. The management responsibilities and those charged with governance responsibilities are outlined in the next section. So management is responsible for the financial statements that they do belong to the town. They're not MNP's financials, obviously. And then as well, maintaining a good system of internal controls is a key aspect from a financial perspective of management. And then those charged with governance, which would be council, is responsible for overseeing the financial reporting process. So kind of that high level overview. And then us as the auditors, seems pretty simple. We're here to audit. So that's our job. If you go to the next page at the bottom, there are a couple little points on here that are a little bit unique to municipalities. The report on other legal and regulatory requirements. It just points to the two notes that are kind of MGA specific, which would be your debt limit note, which is found on note 9, and then the supplemental accounting principles and standards regulation, which is a weird way to say the remuneration note on note 12. So the one that shows the council's remuneration. All right, so to get into the fun part for us accountants in the room, this is the statement of financial position, which is basically your a snapshot at your year end. So at December 31st, 2024, these are what the balances were. And then you've got the 2023 column there to kind of compare to how you were looking the same time last year. So to start off with, we've got your financial assets at the top. So financial assets are basically assets that are cash or will become cash at some point. So we start with the actual bank account. You can see it's gone up about 500,000 to 4.5 million. The main reason for that is you did bring in about $1.2 million from sort of overall general operations, so all the revenues that came in minus the expenses, but then you did use some of those operating dollars to purchase capital assets. So there was about $800,000 worth of capital asset additions in the year, which I'll touch on in more detail a little bit lower down. The next, I guess, bigger item here is trade and other accounts receivable. So this is monies that are owed to the town at the end of the year for everything except property taxes. So the property taxes that are owed to the town will have their own line right underneath this one. But for the most part, these are everything other than taxes. You can see that has gone up quite significantly from 525 to 938,000. So about a $400,000 increase. The main reason is you have some new grants that are included in receivables. So LGFF and CCBF grants, both of those, they just hadn't flowed fully to you yet. So they were still kind of outstanding, even though the money was owed for that year from the government, it just hadn't hit your bank account yet. So it's still sitting in that receivables account. As I mentioned before, the property tax receivable is separated out on its own. So you can see that's gone down a little bit, which is usually a good thing. That means that you're collecting your property taxes quicker. And in this case specifically, it's even better because it's the arrears tax that are lower. So it's always split into current and arrears, and the arrears taxes are lower, which is great for, getting cash in the door. So that's down about $85,000 overall. On the liability side of things, we've got accounts payable and accrued liabilities, which is essentially made up of general accounts payable and then accruals. So the general AP would be monies that you owe to suppliers and vendors that you just hadn't cut the check for yet, but you've got the services before December 31st. And then in addition, it's for things like payroll accruals, vacation accruals. So, if there's a funny timing, if there's people that are paid right near the end of the month, but they don't get their money until January, then there's an accrual reported for that. So the reason for the decrease there, about 55,000, is mainly to do with timing of payroll. So nothing to be concerned with there, just a little bit of timing difference. Your deposit liabilities is up about 50,000. I think there was about 8 new deposits that were received in the year. So when you receive deposits, obviously it sits in the deposit liability account until you repay it back. Deferred revenue, this is your carryover funds. So when you get grants for specific purposes, they sit in this deferred revenue account until next year. Or if, in your case, the biggest chunk of that 67,000 isn't actually grants, it's actually arena advertising that you would have collected in advance. So you collected the money in 2024, but it carries over to be used as advertising in 2025 as well. So you don't get to record that revenue until the year happens. So a little bit of deferred revenue there. Long-term debt is the next big one. That's sitting at about $3.6 million compared to 3.5. So it's up a little bit from last year, but it actually has moved up and down quite a bit in the year. You did receive a new debenture of about $440,000 in the year, and then repaid the other debentures by about $400,000. So even though it looks like it's only changed by $40,000, there was 400 in and 400 out. So kind of interesting there. The asset retirement obligations, we talked about this a lot in prior years, but now it hasn't changed. The bulk of the work was done in prior years, and nothing has really changed. So that makes it a lot easier to understand. We did all the work in prior years, recorded all those contaminated sites and things like that, and now we don't have to do as much work around it. So it stayed the same. Next section here is net financial assets at 1.2 million. That represents your total financial assets minus your liabilities. So kind of what's left over after factoring those in. So this basically means that you've got more cash and accounts receivable than you have payables and debt. So it's a positive position basically. Next section at the bottom here is your non-financial assets, and that is headlined by the tangible capital assets, which is 28.7 million. Like any municipality, that's going to be the biggest number on your books because that's your infrastructure, right? That's everything, buildings, roads, and vehicles, anything like that. So it's it's down about 500,000, which is odd because if you remember at the beginning, I mentioned you purchased about $800,000 worth of capital assets. Included in that, there was some sidewalk work, buildings, roads, some gas assets, but it's all offset by amortization. So amortization was about 1.4 million, and that represents just the passage of time on the assets. As years go by, you do have to expense a little bit of those assets each year. So when you net the additions with the amortization, there is that decrease overall of about 500 grand. The other two inventory prepaids are pretty close to last year and pretty small. So those are either stuff that you have on hand to be used. So it could be signs and all kinds of different supplies that you just have in stock to be used next year. And then prepaid expenses are services basically that you've paid in advance for next year. Then when everything is factored in, we have your accumulated surplus, which is the total overall size of the municipality. So you're sitting at just over $30 million. And I do have another schedule that breaks that down into different categories. So $30 million is the overall, all assets minus all liabilities. Any questions about that before I move on to the next page?
Anything from council? So far, we're good.
Okay, perfect. So the next page is the statement of operations. Looks very similar. The difference here is it's all revenues and expenses. And there is an extra column there, which is your budget. So we're looking at the middle column. That's your actuals for 2024. When we do look at the comparisons to your budget, starting with the revenue side, your property taxes is almost bang on what you budgeted for, which is great. So nothing to report there. User fees, same thing. It's very close to what you had budgeted for. So, bang on there. Gas sales, this one is where it changes a little bit. You've got a decrease or under budget revenue by about 380,000, and that's mainly due to the rates, the gas rates being lower than expected in the year.
Warmer winter.
Yep. Government transfers, you'll notice there's two different government transfers areas. There's government transfers up here, though that's the operating grants. And then if you look further down under the other section, there are government transfers for capital. So the top part is just for operating grants, and you can see that's over budget by about 65,000, and it's mainly to do with local grants. As you get federal, provincial, and local grants, the reason for the increase is specifically around the local side of things. Rental income is up about 88,000 over budget. And the reason for that is there was some lease income not budgeted for, and there was, my understanding, the ice times at the rink were basically maxed out. So there was a lot of revenue coming in, or more than expected, on the ice rentals as well. Investment income is over budget as well by about 50,000, and that's just higher interest rates. As you know, in 2024, rates were pretty high, so that definitely makes sense. And then the only other one that I was going to touch on was the licenses and permits. As you can see, that is quite a bit over budget as well, about 80,000. And this is I believe it was for recovery for a demolition that occurred on property in town. So you receive some monies for that to cover the costs. So total overall revenue is 7.9 million compared to an $8.1 million budget.
100,000.
Boy, the sun just came out. It's blinding me. Let's see. There we go. You can see again. Okay. On the expense side of things, this is where we look at the different departments. So you've got Parks and Rec, which is the biggest department. It is under budget by about 76,000. Main reason is there was just lower repair and maintenance in that area and lower utility costs. It's not a huge difference from the budget, but it is down a little bit. The other ones are actually kind of boring because it's almost bang on the budget. So transportation, environmental, and administration, all very close to what you had budgeted at the beginning of the year. So that's great. Gas production is down under budget by about 320,000, which kind of offsets the revenues at the top. I mentioned you didn't bring in as much revenue as expected from gas sales. So same thing on the expense side. That's also down by about the same amount. Protective services, this isn't a huge difference, but there was some turnover in bylaw staff, so there was a little bit less expenses than budgeted for in the year. So overall, your total expenses were 7.9 million compared to 7.9 million in revenue, so basically break even on the operational side, about $36,000 deficit. But then you factor in your other items down below, and that mainly has to do with your government transfers for capital. So this is your capital grants. It was about $100,000 less than budgeted for, and that's just because there were some projects that were carried forward into next year. So as you know, if you don't spend the money, you don't get to recognize the grants. So there was a little bit more budgeted than happened in the year. So overall excess, when you're factoring in the government transfers for capital, you're left with about a $270,000 overall surplus. Then we get into the same number as in the previous page, that accumulated surplus of 30 million. Again, that's that number I alluded to before. That is the overall size of the organization, so all assets minus liabilities. So I do have a schedule that breaks that one down. Any questions about that one?
Anything through for?
That's the easy stuff. It's all this other stuff when you get into it.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the next bits are going to be real quick, so I'll just kind of flip past some of the pages that I've already kind of talked about that don't add too much more information. You want to go to page 5, which is Schedule 1. This is what I talked about before. There was that $30 million overall accumulated surplus. And basically it's broken down into 3 buckets. The biggest one would be your equity and tangible capital assets. I always like to kind of give the example, a personal example, I guess. If you've got a $300,000 house, it's an asset. But if you have a mortgage of $200,000, your equity in that house is only $100,000, right? The difference between the two. So that's the same thing here. So this 24 million is made up of your total tangible capital assets minus the debt against it, essentially. So that's what equity in TCAs is. In the middle column, you've got your restricted surplus. That 3.1 million is earmarked for future projects. So there is a note that breaks down the specific details of what makes up that 3.1 million, which I'll go over. And then the unrestricted surplus of 2.2 is just the leftover. So kind of what's left after those other two buckets have filled. Okay, so we kind of still cruise along here to page 7, schedule 3. The reason I want to touch on this one is because it does break down your property taxes in a little bit more detail. The one thing that I always like to point out, and obviously as council you're well aware of this, but you do have to tax the residents for 4.3 million, but 904,000 of that is not actually for the town. It gets dispersed to other parties, mainly to the provincial government for education. So really the only piece that is held back at the town is the 3.4 million. So I know that's always an interesting fact that the town has to get the money from the residents but doesn't get to keep it all. So this kind of shows how much the split is there. Okay. The rest is just kind of a little bit more details on the expenses, which I've touched on. So I'll just skip through, and then it gets into the notes. The standard notes are very long and boring. For the accounting policy side of things, they're the same in any municipalities. There's nothing really to add there. But I did want to touch on some of the specific notes. So I'm going all the way to page 16 actually, to note number 6. And the reason I like to touch on this one, it's called bank indebtedness, is just because it's not anywhere in the financial statements that I've already talked about. But just so you're aware that you do have access to $1 million line of credit with ATB. So you haven't drawn on it at this point, you never needed to, but it is an option, and you do have that flexibility if you do have cash flow issues. You do have access to $1 million line of credit. On the next page, which is note 9, is the debt limit note. This one is an important note for municipalities, and it's just a calculation of the total maximum debt that you would be allowed to take out in accordance with the MGA. So the rules around that are it's basically your revenue times 1.5. So that's what the total debt limit number is there, at 11.9 million. And your total debt is 3.6 million, which means you have 8.3 million of additional room that you could borrow on. So that's always an interesting thing to note. So there's lots of room there. You're not close to the limits at all. The next note is note 12 on page 19. That note is essentially the salaries and benefits disclosure note, which I alluded to at the beginning. And I like to mention this one, just I know everybody is aware that it exists, but it is another requirement of the MGA to have the disclosure of mayor and council, as well as CAO and certain designated officers disclosed. So just because your names are on it, I want to make sure that everybody's aware that it's in there. And then lastly, the last note is on page 20, note 15, which is the restricted surplus. So the restricted surplus is the breakdown of that $3.1 million kind of bucket that I talked about in that one schedule, and it just shows the details of what the money is to be used for in the future. So that's kind of earmarked by council. So the biggest one being the gas distribution reserve, some offsite levies, recreation reserve, and so on. So you can see there's very specific dollars assigned to those internally restricted amounts. All right. Any questions about any of that before I move on to the findings?
Anything from council? I've got one under note 14.
Okay.
You talked about our contingent liabilities, and you've identified Alberta Gas and Alberta Munis Insurance Exchange.
Yep.
Are we in a liability situation with the Water Commission in any way, do you know?
I don't think so. It's never come up to my attention that there would be something like that. The ones in here are very broad. They're almost anybody who's involved with those organizations would have this similar note. But from a Water Commission perspective, I don't think you do have any liability associated based on the control of it. So.
Okay.
Lack of, I guess, in this case.
Well, yeah. I mean, we hold a position on their board. We purchase from and supply through and that sort of thing. So it just seemed it's quite similar to the other ones you've mentioned, but whether or not we would have any liability. I know 3 years ago, there was a lawsuit that the Water Commission was working on with a contractor, and it was mentioned at that time as an aside, but it was never part of the financial statement, so I just wondered, that's all.
No. Yeah, no, that has not come up. So I don't know. I don't think at this point that would qualify for this purpose, but I mean, it's something we can look into for next year. It wouldn't impact your financial statements at all. Yeah, that's a guarantee, but maybe there's a disclosure that potentially could be added just for clarity. That's definitely allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next document then is the audit findings. So the title of that one, I'll show you here, it's kind of more colorful one. It looks like this. Okay, that's in your package. And it does talk about the rent order 2024 audit findings.
1 second, just 11.1. There should be a heading there, 2024 audit findings.
No. Financial statements,
Okay, not everybody has that, I guess.
do a refresh here and see what happens. 11, yeah, now we got it.
Now you got it? Let's do a refresh and it'll pop. Or look over my shoulder.
Here we go. You got it? Where is it, Joe? You gotta refresh it. You gotta refresh it.
Close it down.
Just hit the refresh.
That too, yeah.
No.
Just give us 1 sec to catch up.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're in your hands.
Okay, perfect. So if you've got that document, then just flip past the table of contents to page 1. The introduction at the top. I'm going to start with the engagement status. So where are we today as we sit here? Basically, from our perspective, we're done the audit. Just a few things left to get accomplished. First off being the signatures from council after everything's approved. We do need everything approved. And then subsequent events discussion. So I probably asked this question other years, so you're probably not surprised by it, but I do have to ask if anybody is aware of anything that has happened since December 31st to today, basically, that could impact the audit.
Anything from council? Doesn't appear to be anything from us, no.
Okay, perfect. So then the next section here is just a little bit about the audit report. I already talked about it. It's dated today, which is the date of approval, and it has an unmodified opinion. So that basically means it's clean. On to page 2. So this is where we indicate if there's any changes from our audit service plan that we would have presented to you at the beginning of the audit. We did have one change. We downgraded the risk level of asset retirement obligations a little bit. Like I said, I talked about that on the financial statements. There wasn't much to look at. It was mostly, the work was all done in the prior year, so we downgraded the risk. I mean, it just changed a little bit of the types of audit work we have to do around it, but so not a big impact on anything, but we do have to mention that that risk level did change. We did have some challenges with the audit. We did have some multiple journal entries that were provided after the fact, so some things that we kind of worked through together with Allegra to kind of get everything totally finalized. We are here today, so everything was finalized and worked out in the end, but we did have to make some changes to some of the numbers, kind of working together. We did not have any instances of fraud, no issues around non-compliance with laws or regulations. On to page 3. We did have some items to bring to your attention around some of the procedures, some things to kind of tweak for next year, which I'll touch on in the appendix. No going concern issues. Obviously, the town is going to be able to continue on into the future. What else do we have here? We did have some unadjusted differences, which is at the back of the report as well. And our materiality level was 385, which is the same as the year before. Accounting policies, there was one new accounting policy that was technically adopted, that 3400 around revenue, but it didn't have any impact on any of the financial information. So it happened, but it didn't change anything for the town. The estimates that were used were appropriate. So our estimates around valuation of accounts receivable, amortization, and asset retirement obligations was all good. Financial statement disclosures, so those multiple pages of notes that I was talking about, those were all clear and concise and appropriate. We keep rolling along here. Maybe just go to Appendix B. This is the risk areas on page 7. These are the exact same risks that we would have indicated on our audit service plan. So management override of controls is always a risk. Risk around journal entries, we didn't find any issues. Deferred revenue, restricted contributions, we did a bunch of work around that. We do have one comment on that on Appendix C. And then similarly with disclosures around salaries and benefits, we have a comment around that on Appendix C as well. So the next page is Appendix C, so we can talk about those now. The salaries and benefits disclosure, one of the things was that it wasn't fully completed when we started our audit, so after going through everything together, it did get updated, but that's just one thing to note going forward. Contributed tangible capital assets, this is a tricky one, especially in smaller municipalities when there's not a lot of contributed assets on an annual basis. That would be when subdivisions are coming in and things like that. We did notice through our audit procedures that there was one that was missed. It wasn't a very significant one, but still something to keep a lookout for, because those are things where money doesn't change hands. So it's pretty easy to miss. Have to be in kind of chats with different departments to know which assets are being contributed each year. And the last one is the capital projects. Basically, there was some areas that we noticed where some of the stuff wasn't fully completed, so we did kind of work together on capital projects around deferred revenue and receivables and things like that. So at the end, it was all good, but just some things to kind of work on for next year to streamline it even more. The last thing I was going to touch on is the next page, which is the unadjusted differences. So you've probably heard me talk about this table in prior meetings, but basically this is adjustments that we've identified, but they're not posted. So these adjustments are not in your financials, but I think I always talk about this when we talk about materiality. We don't just say, oh, it's less than materiality, so we don't care. Anything that we notice, we bring to your attention, and these are some of those small items. The first one, this one is a bigger number at 122,000, but it's not as significant because it's a potential area. So because there was some properties that have some outstanding balances for quite a while, there's a potential that, in our assessment anyways, that about 120 grand is potentially uncollectible and it hadn't yet been allowed for. So we're not saying that it is definitely not collectible, but due to the length of time it hasn't been collected, specific properties, that is a potential to be allowed for or written off, I guess. The next one is the thing I already talked about, which is the contributed asset. It was about $40,000, and that's the piece that was missed, but it'll just get picked up next year. And it doesn't really impact anything. It's just a non-cash item. And the next one is even more insignificant, but there are credit balances and receivables. So when there's credit balances and receivables, technically it should just be, it should go between receivables and payables just to kind of gross both up. So that's what the 25,000 is. We did have some balances carrying forward from last year of about 55,000. So when you factor all that in with all these items, it is a net adjustment of only $1,000, which is basically negligible. So just wanted to bring those items to your attention as well. And I think, yeah, that's the end of this document. So any questions about that one?
Anything from council? Doesn't appear there's anything on our end.
Okay, so I do believe that Allegra has the signature pages printed out, so I don't know if the plan is to go through the approval process now or later in the agenda, but I'll leave that up to you folks to sign everything and get it back to us. And then the plan is to put the packages all together, and then You'll notice that the copies in front of you say draft on them. Once we have the signatures, we put those into the final package and remove all the draft watermarks. And we are done. So that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you for giving us the information. It's a lot to digest, especially if you're not necessarily that accountant type of person. But you give it to us in bites that we can understand, and that makes it important for us. So thanks very much. Anything else from council? Let Benji go. All the best. We'll see you around, I'm sure, and take care.
Great.
We will get to the we'll get to the approval just a little later in the agenda.
Perfect.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Have a good night.
Hey, Benji.
Strange one, having that agenda, nothing attached. So now we have item 8.1, minutes of the April 1st, 2025 regular council meeting. Councilor Olson.
Motion that we accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you. Discussion? Not seeing any, I'll call that question. All in favor? That's carried. All the way down now to 10.1, public hearings by electronic means, gov-01-2025. Van Buell?
Excuse me. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'll try and get through this without my voice going away from me, but we'll see how it goes. So earlier this month, between Miranda and myself, we caught a bit of a housekeeping item that we failed to do, quite frankly, and it relates to Bill 20. And in Bill 20, there's a requirement that all public hearings must be available to the public, not just to see, but to participate in public hearings. So we caught it just in time because that requirement is due by May 1.
May 1, yes.
So, and again, apologize for that. It was, we were just kind of dotting i's and crossing t's and went, uh-oh, we forgot one. What we did was we went through this through the lens of our procedure bylaw. And so it's an amendment to our procedure bylaw that we're proposing. And there's a couple things that we've tried to do in this. And I think it's just to try and make it easier for our public to understand and be engaged in our process. And although Bill 20 only has the requirement for certain types of public hearings to be available through to the public through electronic means, not just to see, but to participate. What we did was we took it a step further and said, we often use non-statutory public hearings for things like the community standards bylaw, et cetera, et cetera. And rather than confuse the public, what we said was we want to make the change so that all of our public hearings can be, the public can participate in through the electronic process. So that's the first thing that we've tried to do in here. I think the second thing that we tried to do in here is we allow our public, or our members of council to participate in meetings electronically, which is pretty standard stuff now. The difficulty, or what we've tried to do is add the ability for our for our council members to participate in that public hearing electronically as well. Because if there's a meeting that we have a public hearing ahead of time, it just makes sense that, the council member can participate at that point in time. For our statutory public hearings, there's a little bit of a difficulty with that. And it's a bit of a legal technicality in that the only information that a counselor can use to make a decision in a public hearing is information that's been presented at the public hearing. So what we've tried to do in here to protect a potential council member is just a disclosure statement that the counselor doesn't have to be alone because it is a public hearing, but a statement that says the only information they're going to get is from the public hearing, so that if there is somebody in the room, they're not, yeah, because that would be, the potential is there that the counselor could get information that the rest of council doesn't get because they're in a different room. Again, full disclosure, it's a bit of a technicality, but we want to protect the counselor from, you know, that potential of that something happening during that public hearing where we get challenged on what information was used when and when was it presented. So we've added that into the bylaw. Other than that, I think those were the two biggies. Again, we went through this in the report. There's a number of options there's other options there for council. We can leave this alone and simply add the requirement for just the statutory public hearings, and we can, then council will have a decision to make whether a council member can participate electronically outside of the meeting. Certainly from administration's perspective, I don't think there's a big risk. And I think what we're trying to do here is make sure that our public has the ability to participate in the process of public hearings, whether they be statutory or non-statutory public hearings. Other than that, again, protection, counselor identity. The only other thing that's in here is the submission deadline or timeline. We're asking that submissions be given a week to be put into the package, so the Tuesday. That's not to say that if somebody brings something in on Friday, or quite frankly, the Monday, if the public hearing is the Tuesday, that it won't get put into, that council won't receive it. They will. What we've said is it'll just be read into the public record as part of the process.
Okay.
Again, I think that probably covers the bases on that.
Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
I move that bylaw Gov 01-2025 being a bylaw to amend the procedural bylaw Gov 01-2024 be given first reading.
Discussion, council?
You were saying about confusion for the public, but I think it's just also, we're not going from meeting to meeting saying, oh, you don't get to talk at this one, you get to talk at this, and using it as a game, and that our public knows that it's open to them. Whatever. So I think this is the right way to go for it all.
Anything else from council? Go ahead, Councillor Butcher.
I like the part of the discussion where it says we want to exceed the legislative requirements, and that's kudos to administration.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe once this year already, excuse me, once this year already, we lost some input from councillors who weren't able to make a public hearing. This way, they would still have the ability to attend the meeting electronically and be part of that discussion, and therefore be able to vote the end results. So.
Again, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, from administration's perspective, participating in meetings electronically is the new norm. And from our perspective, we just need to find a way to make it happen. And this was the easiest way that we saw to make that happen. And again, it is a disclosure statement that the council member has to make that says, hey, I'm either alone or there is somebody in the room with me, but again, it's a public meeting. The only information I'm going to use is this. And again, it's a risk, but there really is no extra risk, because if you walk out, if there's a public hearing and a counselor walks out of this room and somebody gives them some information, that in itself isn't the problem. The problem is if the counselor uses that information to then make the decision. And that's where it gets messy. So I don't think there's any more risk doing it this way than there is any risk with any other public hearing.
A motion is on the table. Is there anything else from council?
I just wanted to add that under 3.3, 10.4, there should be the word "the" in there. It says "he," it should be the. That's all.
Okay. So that motion is on the floor. Anything else, Councilor Olson?
Reading this here, you want to leave the bylaw for under councillor identity? And do 10.2D in your RFD?
Say that again, sorry.
Council identity confirmation.
Yep.
Leave bylaw 120, this one, I guess? It almost looks like a procedural or a discussion point. Do we want to leave it in as circulated, or do we want to amend? That's what I mean, that's
Again,
what I want to.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of council, that's council's option if they would like to take it out. Again, administration is recommending that it be left in, that we allow that to happen with that indemnification clause.
It is legislated that we have to confirm an identity somehow.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so we just can't show a black screen,
Yep.
voice only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was my understanding of the motion that was coming
Yeah.
through. Yeah.
But if reading the RFD, it sounds like a discussion point here, whether we should leave it in or leave it out, or take it out or talk about it.
Again, leaving that up to council if they would like to take it out.
Mhm.
Certainly administration is recommending that we put it in there and we allow it to go forward.
I personally don't have any trouble with it being there. I don't know what anybody else on the council, but I think your motion's quite clear. So.
My motion is to leave it in there.
Yeah. So I'll call that question. All in favor? And that's carried. Councillor Melnick?
I'll make motion number 2, move that bylaw gov-01-2025 be given second reading.
Thank you. Call that question. All in favor?
Question?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Clarification, do we have to be on camera the whole time?
To me, I think if you are not on camera and audio, then you would be put in the minutes as not being in attendance for that portion.
Because I'm just using for when I'm down east, you know, I'm walking from A to B instead of the mayor getting dizzy trying to watch the camera going around. So,
1
but
second.
I'm still on audio.
I think I have,
Seeing this.
But would it be in?
It won't be in that because this is new.
it's part of the Municipal Government Act for public hearings. I believe the wording, if I remember correctly, is that they have to be at the public hearing for a majority of it.
Yeah. So I'm going black for a minute. Yeah. And back on visuals, okay. I just wanted clarification.
So, excuse me. I think the issue becomes the same as if you recess the public hearing, or you take a recess at a public hearing and then you come back for 10 minutes and a counselor had to leave. Can they vote?
Yeah.
Certainly, if they were there, you know, if it was a 2-hour public hearing, they missed the last 10 minutes, the answer to that is probably yes. If it's a 2-hour public hearing and they missed an hour, you're probably in that gray area.
But you would be recorded as being missing if your picture's not up there, because you can't tell if you're there or not.
Yep.
That might be add up in that time, right?
Exactly.
But if it's a minute, nobody's gonna. Yeah.
Okay. Does that answer that question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that motion is on the floor, and I'll call that question. All in favor? Okay. And Councillor Butcher had her hand up there a second ago for the third motion.
Yep. I'd like to make the third motion, move the council unanimously agree to consider giving bylaw gov-01-22025 third and final reading at this meeting.
Any discussion? Thank you. I'll call that question. All in favor? It's carried unanimously. And then Councillor Cosby.
I move that bylaw gov-01-2025 be given third and final reading.
Thank you. Final discussion, go ahead.
I would just ask, like, Councilor Olson had that question. Can we just get an actual clarification so that we do know exactly? Like, we've kind of talked about it, but we haven't seen what it actually says. So if we can do that.
I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring for that one. I think it would be similar to what we see on the minutes where we see Councillor Olson left the meeting at what's its number and came back at what's his name.
That's what I'm saying. We're saying that, but if we could have some clarification just to make sure that's the way it's going to be handled. Like, I'm not worried about it.
Yeah.
Then
So are you asking for clarification right now or at the time of a meeting?
at the, just the next meeting, just get back to us and how that was gonna be handled. Not right at this moment, because we're just kind of saying, well, this is the way we think we're gonna do it. Let's
So
hammer it out.
I can give you, if a public hearing was held right now, I can tell you how we'd handle it. And that would be, we make a determination at some point in time during the public hearing to say to the counselor, we think you've not been at the majority of, and that would be advice from administration. In the end, it's up to that counselor to make that determination, much like it is a conflict of interest designation, right? It's up to that counselor to say, no, I think I'm good, right? Before they vote. So that's how we would deal with it right now. From administration's perspective, I think that's as close as we can get to giving advice without telling. Because the Municipal Government Act is clear that it has to be a majority, right? And when you use terms, in a legal document, as we all know, when you use terms like majority or then the lawyer, if there is an issue if the public hearing gets challenged for one reason or another, obviously the courts are gonna decide whether it was on base or not.
You could have a meeting where the majority of the actual real meat of the meeting was in the second half, and the person was there for the first half, and they're gone, and they missed the most important stuff.
And that's,
Just going back to Councillor Olson's presentation, the fact that his camera is off, I don't think is the determining factor. He would have to say, I've heard the majority of the meeting, therefore that's how I'm making my decision. And that would be the nuts and bolts of it. Much like pecuniary interest, there's only one person who can tell you that.
who can make that determination, right?
That's that person.
And again, from administration's perspective, we can go, we think that there's a consideration for you, or we think you're okay, but in the end, that
In
is.
the courts will decide.
Right? Yes. It's in the counselor's hands to determine whether they're going to say yay or nay. Now, I think there's the differentiation there is, if you clearly weren't at the meeting, then between, I guess, myself and the mayor, assuming it's not the mayor who wants to go, would have to say, somebody would have to go, you weren't here, and, the Municipal Government Act and the legislation clearly says that you're not eligible to vote on the matter.
Depending on your level of comfort, if you want, we could technically table this at this time to the Cal meeting because it's not a financial position.
No, I'm fine with it.
You're okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just confirming. So the third motion was Councillor Cosby for third and final reading. Any further discussion by council? Not seeing any, I'll call that question. All in favor? And that's carried. Good. Good discussion. New business, financial statements. The exciting part of the meeting. And we're in your hands, Ms. Tingley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So the purpose of this RFD is to accept the audited financials as presented earlier by Benji with MNP. Before we get to that part, I just want to thank all of my staff for all the hard work they put in to prepare for the audit, everything they did during the audit to get things to the auditors, hold down the fort, and to the team at MNP. Like, they're wonderful to deal with. It's my second year with them, and it's been a great working relationship. But otherwise, that is it. That concludes my RFD.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
Move that the 2024 audited financial statements be accepted as presented and circulated.
Discussion, council? I'm just amazed that you can correlate all of those numbers into something that makes sense at the end of the day, showing that we as an organization worked well through the financial side of our year, and at the end of the day we had a few dollars left over. And credit to your budgeting process. We've talked in the past, I think many times at this table, about how budgets are so close and they're getting closer and closer each year, and Benji made comment of it, that the budgeting process was very, very good, so kudos to everybody for that.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just make a
Yes.
comment on that. I'd like to echo what Ms. Tingley said about the staff and the work that they do on the financial statements. It is probably the most important task outside of the budget that we're responsible for from a financial perspective, and they do a wonderful job at it. Just on the budgeting side, and I'm happy to hear council acknowledge how close our budgets are. And I just want to put out a caution there is they are so close, and if something, unfortunate happens, the way we budget right now, like how close our margins are, knock on wood, it's not this year, but if we keep budgeting that close, it's not if, it's when we're going to have a budget where, for whatever reason, we're gonna be in a deficit position. And again, I'll give Mr. Davison's crew and himself a lot of credit, because there was a point in time about September when we kept, we had water breaks and we had this and we had that, and I kept asking everybody, okay, where are we at? Okay, well, we can move this and we can move that and we can do this and we can do that, and you see the result. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because, our staff do, it's not just a budget on paper. It's something that they work hard to try and make sure that, we don't get into the red. We continue to have at least neutral news budgets, if not good news. We do budget very slim fudge factors, and we don't put a lot of contingency into any of our budgets.
Good, Councillor Spicer.
Well, that's adds to how important it is to have some of this stuff, the way that you're starting to budget for certain items like replacement of a truck, right? You're budgeting for that before it happens, and replacement of pumps and whatever else it may be. So, yeah, appreciate that.
Especially when you see the number of zeros attached to many of those.
$13,000 for a pump.
Joke. So the motion on the floor is to accept the audited financial statement as presented. I'll call that question. All in favor? And that's carried. 11.2, tax options. Ms. Tingley, your hands again.
It's corporate services heavy night tonight.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Can we take 5?
Yeah. I'll look for a motion from council for a 10-minute recess. Councillor Olson, call that question, all in favor? And that's carried. Take a
I
second. again.
apologize, I'm going through the water here and pound in water.
Three. Sauna.
Okay, we'll call ourselves back to order, and we're just moving in on 11.2, the tax options.
So sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So this RFD, the purpose of it essentially is to get just a bit more direction from council as to what types of options you'd like to see at COW next week. So we have 3 proposed motions. I will dive into the details. For reference, I did include a previous RFD from March 19, 2024 that really gives a ton of background as to what we're speaking to right now. I won't dive into that too much at this time. Other than specifically when the order expired for the 2024 property taxation year, any assessment and taxation rules per this order also expired. As a result, properties within the previously annexed area are now taxed at the same rates as the other properties in the town, and the farm exemptions that had applied under the order are no longer applicable. So now that the provincial exemption is no longer applicable, the full residential assessment is included and taxed accordingly. So in 2024, these properties were reassigned to tax classification 910, which is farm/residential, and the residential portion is now subject to the town's residential mill rate. So property owners impacted by this change have raised concerns that we saw last year throughout this process regarding the fairness of this taxation shift, and they inquired if there's any sort of middle ground to be found in terms of taxation. To determine what options are available to present to council, administration reached out to municipal affairs, confirmed that per section 297(1) of the MGA, residential properties can be subclassed for any reason that council deems reasonable. So I've included bylaw 910 that outlines our current residential subclasses for your reference, which include improved and vacant residential. So now we're going to dive into some options. So in terms of the farmland, the assessment valuation for farmland is established under the Alberta Farmland Property Assessment Minister's Guidelines. Oof, it's a mouthful. So council doesn't have any authority to apply additional subclasses to farmland. While the assessed value is determined provincially, the town does have the authority to set our own mill rates for each assessment class. So by adjusting the mill rate, council can influence how much each classification or subclassification contributes to the overall tax levy. So some options for your consideration. We maintain the current mill rate structure, and you'll see in the attached bylaw with the property rates for last year, the farm properties are assessed at they have the same mill rate as the residential properties. Or direct administration to prepare information for the committee of the whole meeting next week with the implications of adjusting the mill rate, with the goal of reviewing how the tax burden is distributed across assessment classes and subclasses included in farmland. So a caveat of this restructuring is that not all farmland in the town of Redwater is within the previously annexed areas. So on to residential options. So it's reiteration of the same. So options here are to prepare a draft assessment subclass bylaw that would include a third residential subclass and subject these properties to a lower tax rate than those classified as improved residential. So that would be the properties that were impacted, for example, by that change to that classification, the 910. That were in the previously annexed areas that are listed as residential. So any change to these residential subclasses, including the addition of the third subclass, would impact how the overall tax burden is distributed among the residential properties, because essentially what we're taking is the full amount that we passed during the budget process of the taxation that we need to collect, and we're trying to figure out how the assessment classes fit in that pie and how we can distribute it as evenly or equitably as possible. So we can come up with some options that we can present at CAL for discussion. Financial implications. So as I mentioned, this was passed during budget, the revenue that we have to generate from taxation. So regardless of council's direction, the impact will not have any financial implications, as we will still be generating the same amount of taxation revenue. It'll just be how it's distributed amongst those subclasses. And that concludes my RFD.
Mr. Van Buel?
I could just add a couple points here. So although council dealt with this last year and chose to not make any changes, the mayor and I certainly met with a couple of the affected landowners. And I've continued to get questions from landowners in the annexed area. And in all fairness, one of the commitments that we did make was we said we would look into this and see if there were any viable options that we might have. And unfortunately, there's not a lot. And the reason there's not a lot is again, farmland is farmland. And I've spoken with our lawyers about, can we make a subclass, under commercial and call it agricultural commercial instead of farmland. And I'll tell you what our lawyer said. Sounds like a fancy word for farmland. And, municipal affairs, because your tax rate bylaw has to be filed, would probably believe that you're offside on that. So, and the Municipal Government Act is written so that fairness in your tax structure is paramount within your tax bylaw. The biggest, I guess, room to maneuver, if I can use those words, is in the residential area. Now, one of the things that we heard last year, and I continue to have the discussions with residents about is, and it's about the service level in the annexed area. They don't have water, they don't have sewer, they don't have, and so I think the first question for council to consider, and it's before we talk about any of the proposed motions, is philosophically, do you want to do something? Right? That's really the first question. Is philosophically, do you want to do something different in those areas that we annex? If you do, and I will say if you do, then there's a discussion about how do we do that. And there, again, I think the options from my perspective going forward are around that residential piece where you can create a different subclass. In the farmland, messing with the farmland and just changing your mill rate has some, it has some merit, don't get me wrong, but that will have I think a relatively large impact on the dollars, especially if you do that and something in the residential. So I'll leave my comments at that, but I think the first question for council to discuss is, philosophically, are you interested in doing something different for those areas, for that area that we annex?
And if I understand correctly, the first motion is strictly to bring information forward. It's not binding us to any
Nope.
comment or anything else. It's strictly information.
No, but, and I'll say this, but the reason this is here now is because council says no, and we will drop it. We don't have any other work to do. But if council says yes, we have about 2 days to put together the options and what those mean. And it's gonna take some work to do the financials and do the options. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do them. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there's no use us doing this work if council philosophically is going, thanks for the information, but not interested. Right? If they're interested, but they want to see what the financials are, then I think there's some work to do.
And just some additional, just to kind of circle back to your question, Mr. Mayor. The first motion is related to the farmland properties. The second motion is the assessment subclasses, and then the third is for the residential subclasses. And part of the presentation for next week, I can include an impact of, because the spreadsheet's it's pretty incredible. I can see an average dollar impact on the average residential property if we were to do these options. So you can see how it impacts one part of the pie if we were to do this if we were to maybe include like a different mill rate for farmland, or if we had the assessment subclass for the previously annexed properties, or whatever council would want us to venture down.
Go ahead, Councillor Olson.
I think I'll make the motion to direct administration to prepare information for the April 22nd, 2025 Committee of the Whole regarding the options of adjusting the mill rate for farmland properties, including potential changes to the taxation distribution of farm-related properties.
Thank you. Discussion?
I think we should look into it because, like you said, they don't have the amenities, they don't have the sewer, the water, and I've heard from the residents as well that they're not too happy. But if we do some investigation and bring it back forward, then we have merits to talk to the residents about, saying we did as much as we could, and that's the best that we can do so that they understand it, because there's a lot of angry people out there.
Question?
Go ahead, Councillor
I
Miller.
was just, I think when we talked about it before, when they were here, when that was done up however many years ago, there was no guarantee or promise or anything in that, was there? I don't think, I don't remember what was said exactly when they were here.
All word of mouth, I think.
So, Mayor, members of council, there is, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, there was a letter that was sent out during the annexation proposal, when, as information sessions, there was a letter sent out that said, basically that your taxes wouldn't increase with the annexation. Now, I guess the interpretation of that letter, we can talk about till the cows come home. And if we remember the RFD, there was a time limit put on it by, at that point in time, the Municipal Government Board. And how they come up with 17 years, I don't know. But I believe that was the number of years, and that was what ran out of last year. And so that letter, I think, is part of, I'll call it the frustration or anger from those residents who, you know, the letter said, you know, their taxes would not increase. Right? And I think if you talk to them, what they want us to do is they want us to go back to, you know, what the
Agreement?
you know, well, they want us to follow the spirit of what the order was
Stay with Sturgeon County rates.
and stay with the Sturgeon County rates. Now, again, on farmland, et cetera, I quite frankly, I don't know that we can do that. We can show you what the impact of that would be. We can show you the impact of what, you know, following that rate on, you know, some other annexed area, or we can do something that finds a happy medium. And those are kind of our options, right? I think when we talk about, you know, if you want to do something, I think the process that we would take is to say, okay, there's a mill rate for what we call now improved residential. And if we were going to make a subclass, you would have a subclass that says, you know, and I'm going to use these words, and I don't know we'll have to dig in a bit on how we do this. We might change improved residential to serviced residential and unserviced residential, right? And the unserviced being no water, no sewer, right? And that might be the way we differentiate that. And then what we do is we say, it's not full rate. What percentage of the mill rate is it? Is it an 80%? Is it a 60%? Is it a 50%? Is it a 40%? And we can give you as many different kind of options as you want to see, but there becomes a time where what that does is it shifts your burden into your existing improved residential. And the more you put that back, the more burden you put on that improved residential. And I think the other, and if we go back to the assessment that we just saw, with assessment on residential going up, it's gonna be a double whammy for some of our existing. So, you know, that's why this doesn't get easy, right?
Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
You were talking that 60, 70, 80% thing. Could we also look at that saying, okay, so you don't have services, and that's maybe say, we'll say 80% instead. But could we say 90%, we're gonna do it at 90 because we're gonna take 10% of that for future that we're gonna be putting aside for you to get sewer and water? Is that in the realm of possibility?
I think it's in the realm of possibility. Without knowing what that number is.
I'm just throwing numbers out, I know. I'm just, concept.
I've just done a whole bunch of work, as you know, on finding out what costs for water and sewer is. And I can tell you that
I think it's 200 years at 10%.
sewer line is $2,000 a meter right now to install.
So you look, John and Kathy,
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, Councillor Melnick, I believe the original application from the town for the annexation stated that we wanted that annexation to take place at the Sturgeon mill rate until such time as that land was developed, if I'm not mistaken.
That's my understanding from what I saw of that.
And then the municipal government board came back and said, you got 17 years and figure it out from there. So the other side of that was, I don't think anybody noticed it when it came back as the order in council. I don't ever remember, I was here then, and I don't remember anybody sending out notices or anything else saying this is what the final order was. It would have been exceptionally easy if this discussion was taking place 18 years ago. It would be exceptionally easy. We'd have a whole better understanding of what it was. I think one of the things that you pointed out in the RFD is that when that flip happened, the farm exemption was lost. And for some of the farmers, that's over and above taxation. We're not talking taxation. They've lost thousands and thousands of dollars with not being able to claim an exemption just because of the classification. So it's a little bit more in depth than just taxation. It's a little bit of fair, equitable, and best policy, best practices, I guess, my point. But go ahead.
And I can provide slightly more, so I have the assessment summary in front of me. So in terms of, so improved residential, like not the previously annexed, it's 194 million compared to the 910 codes that we're talking about at just under 1.5 million. So if we were to like allocate 10% for future development, that would take an incredibly long time. It would be like a good faith gesture. It was something we couldn't include without an amendment for this year, but great in theory. But again, it would just be so long down the road. And
honestly, running a water line or a sewer line for 2 toilets isn't going to make a lot of sense. Go ahead, Councilwoman.
thank you. Regardless of what you say, whatever was said and whatever ended up on paper, according to this, everybody had a copy of it, so if they didn't read it, it's their own fault. Stating that in 2023, we could revert back to the town's bylaw. I understand what you're saying, and I understand it's not financially feasible for us to pave 200 meters of road, put a sewer and a water line in, that's gonna cost taxpayers, I'll just throw $6 million budget out there just to say your town residents, you know, and yes, I'm sorry, but I said it before, and I'm sorry you didn't get all the amenities that was promised to you by 15 councils ago and 5 CAOs ago and everything else, right? So It's right here in black and white that was put out by Mr. Ed Stelmack.
So, motion on the floor for the farmland properties. Anything further? Call that question, all in favor? That's carried. Councillor Williams?
I make the motion number 2 that council direct administration to bring forward an assessment subclass bylaw, which includes a third residential subclass to the April 22nd, 2021.
And again, this isn't,
Just information.
yeah, it's for more information for us. Anything on that one?
I just have one question. So regardless of what our mill rate is, the provincial government does not change their mill rate when they're taking money out of our bank account based on our subclasses, correct? If we were to do a subclass, they're still gonna take what they're gonna take.
Yeah, those numbers have already been set.
Yes. Yeah, the only thing we can set is our municipal mill rate, which is the dollars that we collect. The province will tell us how much we're gonna collect off of each residence for education portion. And we will remit that. And for anybody who's listening, we remit that whether people pay their taxes or not.
Mm-hmm.
The province, quite frankly, doesn't care.
But just based on what you were saying, if I understand it correctly, if we were to change a mill rate, that will not affect what the person has to remit for their education or their seniors. They will remit at the provincial level. Okay, good, I understood that. Okay, I'll call this question then. All in favor? Any opposition? And then there was a third motion proposed. Anything from council on the third motion? Not seeing any? No? Okay.
Can't ask a question now either, right?
Go ahead, yeah.
Can I ask one just pertaining to the other two motions?
Sure.
Okay. I was just curious, so if we did change it, just say we bumped it down, I think you answered this, but I didn't understand it, I guess. So say if Allegra does bring something and we say whatever, 80% instead of 100, or just whatever. So how, you said, would it trickle down and affect like the residents like here in town? Like, so you did, yeah, that's what I thought you said, okay. So it will, how?
It's the whole pie.
Yeah, so it'll affect everything. So people in town will pay a little bit more to offset our decision, right?
Pie does not change
Yeah.
the need to run the town,
It's
how
the
it's
slices.
distributed.
Yeah. It's how big the slice is.
Here's the best way I can explain it, and for anybody who's listening or listening later on, as Councillor Olson said, the pie, you know, the size of the pie we need, that's set through the budget. Right? So that's set. Council, what council does through the tax rate bylaw and through the subclasses is council determines how that pie should be equitably distributed. Right? So, you know, as an example, there's municipalities who have a discussion and they'll say, we want 60% of the dollars that we collect every year to come from non-res. And we want 40% or 30% to come from res, and then we want, you know, 10% to come from farmland. And so philosophically, what they do is they say, that's how, equitably, that's how we want this pie set up, right? And so every year when you say, here's what your budget is, with that percentage in mind, then they go, this is what we need to get. What that, you know, and that's a philosophical discussion that is, quite frankly, too big of a philosophical question for right now. we're digging a little bit deeper and saying, do we need a subclass in that residential, and how do we deal with farmland to deal with this issue that we haven't put to bed yet, I guess, is the best way to say it. Does that make sense?
Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
Well, we don't have a motion on the table, but I'm thinking that if we don't have the third motion there, and we're going ahead with the second one, we kind of need that third one, do we not?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of council, we kind of put it in there so that we made sure that you knew that we're gonna bring you a whole bunch of information. Here's what I tell you, if you don't give me, if you don't pass the third one,
We're gonna get it anyway.
you're probably gonna get it because you can't make a decision on 1 and 2 without us giving you all the information.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of not fair, but we wanted to be transparent and saying, here's the 3 things that we're gonna do if you wanna have this discussion.
I'll make the motion that council direct administration to prepare information for April 22nd, 2025 Committee of the Whole regarding options for adjusting the mill rate for residential properties, including potential changes to the residential subclass, distribution and establishment of a mill rate for the third residential subclass. And just emphasis on potential.
Definite. Go ahead, Councillor Williams.
I just want to make the comment that I think this is very important to bring this information to council so that we can make that informed decision, so that our residents know why we are doing this. Why we can't let everybody else in town subsidize a few of our other residences. And this will help us make that decision. Sorry you have to do all this extra work, but, you know, I think this just makes us more transparent to our residents as to why this process needs to be followed. It doesn't need to be followed, but the information is coming forward.
And I'm thinking down the road, we'll have sort of a similar type of process when we're dealing with derelict, dangerous, what have you, properties that I'm glad Mike mentioned that he will work with administration to find out a couple of those addresses and take a good look at them, so.
And I'll just make a quick comment on the whole derelict property. Again, we have way more runway on residential than you do on even commercial, right? Because you've got 2 subclasses in commercial, you have unlimited in residential, so. And I know Allegra's done a lot of work on this. I know I've looked into the city of Edmonton. Before you do this at the tax rate level or at your subclass level, there's some steps that we gotta put in place before we go down that road, so that we can, you know, if we wanna do this, whatever it is on derelict properties, gotta make sure that you've defined it and you've notified people appropriately. Otherwise, you're gonna get challenged, guaranteed.
Go ahead, Councillor Mill.
I was just wondering, way back when, 17 years ago, 18 years ago or whatever, so they had a vote on that at the time, right? The residents and everything to pass it through, like for the annex? Oh, okay, I was just curious how it worked.
So the process, sorry, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'll give you kind of annexation 101. So when there's an annexation proposal made, there's an annexing municipality. In this case, it was Redwater, and then there's the, I think they call it the, I'm missing the name. Anyway, there's the municipality that has to respond. It's the responding municipality, that's what it is. And they make a proposal. There's negotiations between the 2 municipalities. Part of the process says that you have to have public consultation in that process. And so the public in this case that we're going to be changing municipalities were asked for their input. They had the opportunity to give their input at the municipal government board. And then once there's assuming there's a negotiated response to the annexation proposal, it goes to the municipal government board who makes a final decision. In this case, part of that final decision was the length of time that they were gonna hold tax rates at the Sturgeon County level for those for those areas. What's important is they didn't freeze tax rates. They said, you gotta use the same tax rate as Sturgeon County is gonna be using in that taxation year. So, did they vote? No. Were they consulted?
Okay.
Yes.
They could have opposed it, they could have gone to the public hearing.
what I was
That's
wondering.
all they've got.
But that's all they've got. But they don't actually get a chance to vote.
Okay.
So the last motion on the table, any further discussion? Call that question, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, council. Like I said, 18 years ago, it would have been a lot easier to handle this.
Yeah.
11.3, branding guidelines. Mr. Van Buren.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, this is a little bit of a housekeeping item, but kind of a change. In going through our branding guidelines, one of the things that we want to change, or that we're recommending to change from administration is we want to make a change in removing the top part on the logo where it says Town of Redwater. So right now it says Town of Redwater, a natural home. That's the full logo. Right now we only put a natural home on written correspondence. Right, that tagline goes on there. What we want to do is we want to use the logo that says Town of Redwater for staff apparel. It's going to be part of how we notify the public that that you're working for the town. I'll give you an example, ball caps. Our public works staff, they use ball caps all the time. And what we want to do is we want to standardize some of that stuff so that when they put a ball cap on it, it's a Town of Redwater, and it says Town of Redwater. For that apparel that we give away, sell, et cetera, simply say Redwater with our logo on it. Kind of a minor change, but major in the fact that Town of is now going to be reserved for staff, council, et cetera. I don't think there's anything else really to highlight in there. I think that pretty much outlines it. We took it to what committee did we take it to? Corporate Services.
Committee.
Yeah.
Policy committee.
Corporate Services Committee meeting. They agreed with it. It was one of the ones that we had, and they said, get her there on the 15th. So if there's any other comments from any of the committee members, go from there.
Mr. Chair, any comments?
Go ahead, Councillor Melnick.
I'll make the motion that council approve the replacement of Appendix A, branding guidelines within communications policies 007.3 with the updated version as presented.
Discussion, council?
As we stated, it's a lot cheaper than having 4-inch staff stacked on your back.
And I think it's important to give our staff that credence, their credibility by saying, yes, the Town of Redwater is where I work. That's me. Okay. Further? Go ahead.
The only other thing I'd like to change eventually is that a natural home.
Yes.
It's-
I know.
That still bugs me.
We had that discussion.
You had friends at the table.
Okay, good.
Motion on the table, I'll call that question if there's no further discussion. All in favor? Oh, you were ahead of the game, is that all?
Yep.
All in favor? And that's carried. I thought for a minute you wanted to say something, you were so fast. All right, reports, Councillor Butcher? No? Okay. Councillor Melnick?
Nothing at this time.
Councillor Williams? Mine is presented, Councillor Spicer?
I'll put in a full report, but just to let you know that I'm now vice chair of Rose Ridge Dan Deck has stepped down, because he stepped down as mayor. Brian Holden from Bonacord has stepped up into chair, and I've taken over vice chair on that one.
Congratulations.
And the next board meeting for Northern Lights, my position's up for election, so we'll be running for that too, so we'll see what happens.
Good. Councillor Cosby,
As presented.
as presented. Councillor Olson.
I'm the same as Councillor Spicer. I'll submit a written one next week. But everybody got a copy of the minutes of the meeting from the Transportation Infrastructure Committee with their MLA, their minister. There's some interesting stuff in there that they're looking at that we didn't even know about. So, but it's a good read. That'll be on as well for the public to read. So, but I just thought I'd give you that. It's, a lot of it deals around, well, most of it's around Highway 28, a little bit 28A, but.
Vinca Bridge.
Yeah, Vinca Bridge, and we're gonna be doing a, design stage right now for widening the road between here and out to 3 miles east of town, out to 830, 829, whatever number that is, 3 miles east.
644 to 829.
Yeah. So that, well, and as we discussed earlier, before the meeting when we were talking about it, they're making the new Vinca Bridge high, wide, low corridor. They'd have to widen this road a little bit too.
And it's interesting to see feedback from some of those committees that we belong to that aren't sitting at the table. You know, we have representation there, and I know there's, you mentioned NLLS, and you're at this one, and Hub, and several others. There's a lot of work that goes in by council outside of the chamber.
Through to Councillor Olson. When you say this road is Highway 38, they'd have to widen?
No, from Jaynard,
Yes.
3 miles out.
Okay.
It's in the design stage, I think it states right now.
Yeah.
Bridge work and widening, it states. Or grading widening or something.
After they just redid it all and put those real nice rails down the side.
No, it just, yeah, just
We can get more guardrails.
discount.
Okay. Motion to accept reports as information.
Make that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cosby. I'll call that question. All in favor? And that's carried. Correspondence and information items. Generally, we have a letter from Minister McIver. Bill 20, Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act, came into force last year. And there was quite a discussion amongst municipalities about whether or not we could use tabulating machines for the voting process, and we were told unequivocally, no. We have to have paper ballots and we have to spend time counting them. But if we have someone who is not able to produce the ballot themselves, there's an electronic assistance device that will help them produce their ballot. And EATs, I guess, elector assistance terminals, and we've been advised by the that we can use those. Bonacord has sent a letter to Minister Ellis regarding the police funding model. We heard at the Spring Leaders Caucus, the province 39% increase in the police budget. So I'm assuming that the next budget will not have such a credit for the municipalities. I'm sure we'll be picking up some of that tab down the road. But Bonacord has forwarded their concerns with respect to policing costs is 2% of their budget, a 2% increase to their budget. And then the latest and greatest is Bill 50. Excuse me. Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act. Municipal Government Act, Local Authorities Election Act, new home buyer protection and safety codes are all affected by the singular bill. The Local Authorities Election Act is probably most prevalent for us. It tells us the administrative requirements. I can advise council that Mr. Van Buell and I had a telephone conversation with the Deputy Minister with regards to a question we raised at this Leaders Caucus, and that was with regards to eligibility. It's not addressed in Bill 50, but we anticipate there will be something coming down the pipe at some point in time with regards to it.
2 weeks before the election.
Yeah, or 2 days, never knows. So because we've got some action items to follow, I'll take a motion from the table to approve 13.1 as information.
I'll make that motion to accept correspondence as information.
Thank you. Call that question. All in favor? And then we've got a request from the Alberta Association of Nurses for a declaration for National Nurses Week, May 12th to 18th. They're looking for a proclamation to come from council. And then we have a request from the Mayor of Brampton requesting that we stand for Canada. And I believe that's a discussion we had at council a couple of 3 meetings ago where we talked about what we could do as a result of the tariffs that were being talked about at the time, which seems to have calmed down to a dull roar. But
They're trying to raise it again today. The
Yeah.
media is trying to dig it up again.
sells papers, what can we say? So I'd be looking for response from council with regards to 13.2.1 and 13.2.2. Councillor Olson?
I'll make the motion that we, for the Nurses Week declaration.
Yes.
We refer to the policy.
It is not a standing proclamation, so therefore
That's what I mean, refer,
it comes to us.
okay, what's the policy, that's what I mean, what the policy state with regards to proclamations, because I know there was only certain ones we were making. So that's what I want to know what the policy states.
And Ms. Stewart.
So the proclamation policy is that we set certain standing proclamations, and then we set certain criteria around the ones that come to council for the request, and this met the requirements to come to council as a request.
I'll make the motion that we, what is it, May 12th to the 17th or something? Whatever the proclamation is for the dates.
12 to 18, yep.
That we have the proclamation, I guess.
Okay. Super. Discussion? Call that question, all in favor? And that's carried. And then 13.2.2, stand for Canada. Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
I make the motion to accept it as information. I want to make a comment on that, though. It's not that I don't stand for Canada. I just, I struggle with this, that it's rah Canada right now, right? And it's being used for political reasons and stuff like that. Rah Canada all the time.
Yeah, well, exactly, in 2 weeks it'll be back to your corners and pretend nothing happened.
Yeah. We have problems with trade between all our provinces and all this other stuff. And let's start solving these problems instead of making these kind of things. Get down to business.
And just to piggyback on what you're saying, our administration works very hard at making sure we're supporting our local and national processes. There are, however, some requirements that for certain projects and what have you, by law, you have to at least let them to American entities but you could restrict their responses, I suppose. But I see in the news today, there was a coalition of mayors from across Canada were meeting in Lethbridge or someplace today. And I wonder how effective that's going to be at the mayoralty level of standing up to the international trade. It's, yeah, maybe as mayors we can talk about trade in Canada, but to influence what's going to happen north and south, I doubt if the mayors are going to be.
I think it's more of an economic development, because I think it's the border city mayors, you know?
Yeah.
We're so used to going back and forth some of these places that they're actually fairly close. You know, we're not seeing the cross-border shopping on either side, and figure out how they can help each other out.
So a motion on the table to accept the Stand for Canada letter as information, because we're doing most of it already anyway. So I'll call that question. All in favor? And no opposition. Thank you. 14.1, Councillor Olson.
First, I don't want to take your thunder.
You go ahead.
Make a motion to go into closed session.
Thank you. I'll call that question. All in favor? And just give us a minute to change the electronics. Counselor Butcher?
I'd like to make a motion to come out of closed session, your worship.
Thank you. Call that question. All in favor? That's carried.
Motion to adjourn?
Counselor Clifton, thank you. We have a motion to adjourn. All in favor? And that's carried.